And so, Karl, that is quite a bold statement. I'm wondering, and I'm curious, how confident are you that that is true?
There's zero doubt.
Zero doubt. Amazing. I mean, just look at that guy. Is he gonna lie? Why would he lie? Like, what are his benefits? What advantages does he gain to sit on that stage and say there is absolutely zero doubt that there's non-human intelligence out there and that it's interacting with humanity? Wow, amazing interview.
Chris Lado, welcome to Lado Files.
This is a recent interview recorded May 21, 2024 of Karl Nell. He was actually David Grush's boss on the UAP Task Force. So his military career, he served for 30 years in the U.S. Army. He held various positions related to aerospace and intelligence. He has a background in engineering. He's worked on advanced aerospace projects and technologies. His expertise includes operational planning, intelligence analysis, and development of defense technologies. So this would be quite interesting to see what he comes out of this interview. Let's check it out.
It's a pleasure and honor to be here. It's a fantastic event, and I'm glad to see a large bunch of folks that stuck it out to the end for this talk. So I was fortunate. I had a 4-year ROTC scholarship to Penn. I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. The Army sent me overseas to do signal corps engineering projects, so I did a lot of strategic comm projects in Europe. I ended up working in Army Space Command. I commanded a satellite ground station, war trace to the Joint Chiefs. I spent some time at Wright Patterson Air Force Base. The Army ultimately sent me to get a master's in mechanical engineering, a master's in strategic studies, graduate work in computer science.
Okay, so right there, I think it's already interesting that he has satellite experience. So I was in the Air Force for 24 years, if you include the Air Force Academy, and I never saw anything related to top secret satellite information. It's very difficult. It's kept super secure, and so it's really need to know only. So interesting that he was involved in satellite technology, and he was also at the fabled Wright Patterson Air Force Base, long rumored headquartered of all of this UAP technology.
I was on track to stay in, but I decided that I wanted to pursue more of a technical career. So I got out and ended up working at Bell Labs, which was a fantastic place. Unfortunately, I was there during the trivestiture that folks may be familiar with, where the company got split up. I left Bell Labs and ended up working in Lockheed Missiles and Space. I worked at Northrop Grumman. I've ran strategic technology programs in the defense industry, worked for a lot of the 3-letter agencies, ultimately was a deputy chief of staff or deputy CTO for a $2 billion company. I was a vice president general manager of a Northern Virginia-based R&D firm. I stayed in the military, in the reserve. I commanded at every grade level through brigade. I was fortunate to stand up the Army's newest expeditionary MI brigade. I was the deputy chief of staff for a combatant command. Ultimately, this experience sort of combined to give me the opportunity to come in and advise Army Futures Command, the largest reorganization in the Army Reserve since really 1973.
So that's amazing there. He mentions Bell Labs, he mentions Lockheed Martin, another R&D company. So really has the perfect background to come in and analyze the UAP enigma, right? He's worked in the corporate sector, and he also has a lot of experience in the military. Colonel is difficult to get to. Okay, it's very difficult. I retired as a lieutenant colonel. Getting to colonel takes another whole step, takes another whole level of commitment, and a lot of it is luck as well. To get to full-bore colonel is not so easy.
On how the Army could be more effective. And my last assignment was involved with the UAP Task Force, which maybe is the most apropos for this discussion.
And so, Karl, here's the million-dollar question. Do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet?
Right. So non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing.
So that's just amazing. right there. So he was in charge, at least high level, of the UAP Task Force. But he says just 100% confidence right there that non-human intelligence exists and non-human intelligence is interacting with humanity. And this has been going on for a long time. So just amazing statements right there from someone who had all the clearances, right? He had the satellite knowledge. So he could look at any sort of satellite information. He had the contacts. He had all the information contacts in the corporate sector. He knew how the R&D efforts work. He knows how contracting works, surely. And he has a lot of contacts still. Like he said, he gives insight to military commanders. So quite interesting. He says point blank right there, NHI exists and it's interacting with humanity.
And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
And so, Karl, that is quite a bold statement. I'm wondering, and I'm curious, how confident are you that that is true?
There's zero doubt.
Zero doubt. Amazing. I mean, just look at that guy. Is he going to lie? Why would he lie? Like, what are his benefits? What advantages does he gain to sit on that stage and say there is absolutely zero doubt that there's non-human intelligence out there and that it's interacting with humanity? Wow, just an amazing interview.
And Karl, what evidence have you seen? What was the moment where you developed this level of conviction? Because what you're saying is extremely consequential and very important. And I know that a lot of people here, even perhaps, may not believe that statement.
Right. Well, probably a better way to ask that is how can the folks in the audience come to the, a common understanding of what this phenomenon is? And so there's sort of two tracks here. One is from first principles, and another is actually from the data. So let's take a look at the data. So we can look at some folks that have very high level access to information, like Paul Hellyer, who is the defense chief for Canada, has come out and said the same thing. We can look at Ham Eshed, the head of Israel's, or former head of Israel's Space Force, has said the same thing. Chris Mellon, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intel, SAPCO, has essentially said the same thing. Lou Elizondo has said the same thing. David Grush has said the same thing. David Grush cleared for presidentially level material. So you're looking at people that are in a position to know this, and they're telling you the same thing. You could take a look at the Gang of Eight in the Senate and in Congress. So there's two members of the Gang of Eight, Marco Rubio and Senator Chuck Schumer, that signed up to the UAP disclosure amendment last year that basically said they're not being told the truth and we need to push forward on that. So that's sort of an overview of some of the data. From a first principles standpoint, what's so unusual about this realization? There's billions of stars in the galaxy. Life here evolved in 500 million years, which is basically a blink of an eye. We've found planets around every star that we've looked at. It's likely that the universe is full of life. If you look at the SETI program in particular, the SETI program has all the same assumptions that you would accept and probably make with respect to this topic, except that they believe that non-human intelligence is transmitting signals here. But at the same time, like, we're not transmitting signals. SETI doesn't transmit signals, and the only signals that are actually broadcast of high enough power into space for somebody to pick up come from broadcast television and ballistic missile early warning systems, which you could argue our technology is moving away from. We're going to satellite, we're going to fiber. Broadcast TV is a thing of the past. And if you get to some state where society is stable, maybe we don't need ballistic missile early warning systems. So the other guy is probably not going to transmit. But what the other guy may do is come here if that's possible to do. And there's physics models that suggest that may be possible.
So quite interesting there. So he mentions many high-level people have actually come out and said this exists, right? They're just not believed. They're discredited. If you look on the Rendlesham Air Force Base incident, Charles Halt, Colonel Halt, basically says firsthand account of a UAP actually beaming a light beam down near him, searching around. There's many accounts, hundreds, possibly thousands of accounts, they're just not believed. Why? Because they couldn't possibly be here. And if we talk about actual signals from alien intelligence, I released a video, RB-47. That's actually an ELINT spy aircraft, has captured signals from a UAP. Actually recorded it back in 1957. So we've known for almost 70 years, and we've had actual signals from UAP, at least that one signal correlated to a visual sighting by the pilot. So we have actually had a signal where you have SETI looking out into the galaxy, into the universe for signals, but right here, the signal's right there, right? If you look, signals go down, at least electromagnetic signals go down by the square root law. So it decreases extremely, extremely fast. So there's a chance that there is tons of signals out there. We just don't have enough sensitive equipment to actually detect it. The other interesting point that Karl Nell says here is he relates it to billions and billions of planets, as in extraterrestrial. We'll get a lot of questions or comments saying it's extra dimensional, or it's us from the future, or it's from some other spiritual realm, if you will. But he goes right to the extraplanetary, so extraterrestrial, which seems like the most obvious, right? Is that he's actually coming from the trillions and trillions of other worlds that we see around us. And he says there, likely the universe is just full of life. So this could be maybe the fact that they're keeping secret. And why would they keep it secret? Is so you can get early access, unfettered access to this amazingly advanced technology, right? If you have the information and your adversaries do not, that's a huge advantage.
And Karl, I mean, what you're saying is extremely consequential, and you've referenced other people that have said the same thing that also have similar credibility. There's similar reasons for why we should believe many of these folks, yet the government itself has not formally disclosed. They've been very reluctant to do that. Why? Why do you think that is?
So there's 6 basic reasons, and this, again, you could draw this out from first principles. There's a national security reason. There's the lack of a plan. There's the potential for societal disruption. There's the possibility that there's some non-public agreement. There's the potential for misdeeds and the desire to cover up misdeeds. And there's just the basic organizational intransigence and lack of priority that might be associated with the topic.
That's amazing right there. He just rattles off 6 main reasons why it hasn't been disclosed. And the first one is national security. And there's really no benefit. There's no advantages at all, right? So these are reasons it hasn't happened, really negative effects. So those are disadvantages to disclosing the information. You're able to just rattle off right there. National security is number 1. And then looking terrible in the eyes of the world as well as your populace is very high up there. It's all of the misdeeds that have been done, all the people over the decades that have just been treated like dirt, delegitimized, how many people have even been killed, as well as lack of a plan. So these are all disadvantages, 6 extremely strong disadvantages, and I'd argue there's no real advantages. He'll go through a few reasons why he thinks it should be disclosed, but you'll see that these 6 just obviously trump it.
So all these things are factors. The issue is that really the national security issue subsumes all the others. And so there's an opportunity maybe to contract the national security issue similarly to what was done with nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, such that nuclear energy is not necessarily classified and is available to the public. But lack of a plan and the potential for societal disruption are key ingredients that would prevent any responsible leader from coming forward with information that they don't have the means to address in a responsible way. It would be.
So that's amazing because national security is number 1. That's going to be your DoD, Central Intelligence Agencies. They do not want to give any of this information away, right? Because information is power. Knowing that this is a reality gives you a huge, huge advantage over any other nations that don't know. Think of the freedom of maneuver that you have now to get to these crash recoveries, to actually bring back amazing technology. Imagine alien technology. Just being able to look at it, reverse engineer it, will give you so much of a technical advantage that the DoD, your national security apparatus, is just not going to give that up, right? Not going to give that up. And then from a leadership perspective, from the civilian angle, think of the societal disruption that would happen just with that information being out there, being known, as well as now the civilian populace knowing that you've been covering this up for almost 80 years, right? Covering it up and definitely lying to everyone, lying to the populace. I think that would be the actual civilian leadership now. Again, there's no advantage. These are huge disadvantages.
Irresponsible to do that.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you have absolute conviction that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet, that there are factions within our own government that know about this, yet we still don't have a plan, and they may represent a security issue. This may pose a threat to humans, yet you still believe that we should disclose. Is that right?
Correct, right. So there's really three reasons that trump all those others. And those others are basically valid, like I said. So the first issue is the moral right. The government exists for and by the people. And so the nature of reality is fundamentally not government information. People have a right to know the world in which we live, and the pursuit of happiness requires that knowledge. So that's sort of the first kind of...
So the first one is reasons why. I wouldn't say this is not an advantage, right? Is that they have a moral obligation. So think of that. The CIA, the DoD has a moral obligation to actually release this information. And I don't see where that's written in any of our documents, right? You have the right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. It doesn't say anything about knowledge about the universe. Okay, so I don't think the government has shown any sort of history, or any government has, on moral obligations to the people, and at least survive very long, right? They're obliged to protect the populace, not to morally inform them. So I don't think the CIA was morally right when they overthrew so many governments, right, in the name of defense of the U.S. Why would they give this information blithely to the American people who have no real need for it, as well as it'll just throw off society and highlight all their misdeeds? So moral obligation, I think, is not an advantage.
Overarching philosophical foundation for this. But, as a corollary to that, if there are misdeeds that were done, then they need to be remediated. If there's lack of proper oversight, which is suggested by some of the whistleblowers, that needs to be remediated. So the first issue is the moral issue. The second issue is being in a reactive mode is never preferable to being in a proactive mode. So reactive mode is basically trying to prevent disclosure. But failing that, you might get a situation where you have catastrophic disclosure that creates all the problems that you were trying to prevent. So a more balanced middle path of controlled disclosure is the best way to do this, which is, again, an argument for some amount of disclosure.
Okay, so but what this doesn't take into account is it would totally change your posture on the planet, right? So the U.S. and allies now, if they release this information to the rest of the planet, now they will be completely reactive, right? They will completely lose the freedom of maneuver. If you imagine all these nations down in South America, in Africa, across Asia, all these little nations now know that this is a reality. And as soon as the information is released, everyone will know. Boom. So they will totally lose the freedom to maneuver. So now they can't just proactively go and retrieve crash retrievals, right? They can't go and just get that alien technology, which is going to be a huge benefit. Now they're completely reactive. So the global standpoint from the US and its allies would go to a completely reactive footing. They would completely lose their freedom of maneuver. So, yeah, I don't see how that would be possible. And like I said, so far, over 80 years, their plan has worked. So just keeping this lid on the whole disclosure, delegitimizing people, the system works as it is. We haven't had catastrophic disclosure. So obviously the NHI is not interested in giving this information, like highlighting their existence to the rest of humanity. So the NHI isn't interested. The rest of the world hasn't found out. Why would you give this information up? You would totally change your footing from having freedom of maneuver to being proactive in your UFO recoveries to now you're completely reactive. You're on the same footing as almost everyone else.
And the third part is simply societal advance and global competitiveness. More brain trust needs to be brought into this topic in order to make progress and to improve society. And
yeah, this is definitely a reason to do it, is because if they haven't figured out what it is, then why would releasing this to the rest of the world give any benefits, right? But again, does this sound like something the government thinks is an advantage? No, they want to keep the information close to their chest. Keep this extremely volatile, extremely powerful, could be dangerous information in the hands of the professionals, right? In the hands of the people who know what they're doing and have the best interests of the nation and the planet at heart, right? Then they can bring on their own specialists, their own scientists, and bring in the smartest people. So why give this information out so that anyone willy-nilly can now create dangerous weapons in their home backyard? Maybe they can capture their own UFO technology, and if it's as dangerous as nuclear weapons per se, now you're just giving that information to everyone out there. Think of all the rogue nations now who can get access to extremely dangerous UAP technology. So you definitely want to keep this dangerous information. You're not sharing nuclear weapon secrets out to the world, right? In the benefit of furthering humanity. So again, doesn't seem like anything that one nation is going to do. The nation's going to make decisions to ensure its own survival.
And so all three of those things together trump the 6 other reasons for non-disclosure.
And what do you think happens if we don't disclose? I know you mentioned this idea of catastrophic disclosure. Maybe disclosure may be forced upon us. How do you think about that?
So the situation is usually thought of as a binary state. It's like an all or nothing. And people have sort of argued this. But anybody paying attention realizes the government has already indicated that unidentified anomalous phenomena are real, they're not ours, and they're not our adversaries. The Pentagon has said that. Like, for people that are paying attention, like, that shoe already dropped. So for a lot of people, they think that the second shoe to drop is this is non-human intelligence, and maybe the conversation stops there. Like, the president comes out and says, there's non-human intelligence. The truth is that will precipitate this crescendo of other questions that maybe the government's not ready to answer, that will court, if not precipitate, potential negative ramification for society. And so as an example of this, I would actually point to something from the ancient past, the Bronze Age collapse. So Eric Klein, Princeton University, 2015, wrote a very interesting book called 1177 BC, the year that civilization failed. And so this is well known to current scholarship. Within a single lifetime, all of the very effective ancient civilizations of the Bronze Age failed due to a confluence of reasons that are not necessarily fully understood today. So we're talking about Egypt, the Hittite Empire, the Minoan Empire, the Mycenaean Empire, the Babylonian Empire. All these civilizations failed, never to return, other than, let's say, Egypt. And so these were highly sophisticated civilizations with highly developed infrastructures, highly developed administrative states. They were globalist, in a sense, very similar to today. In terms of the known world, the known Near East, they were economically interdependent. They had both diplomatic ties and commerce ties. And yet these civilizations failed in a single lifetime because of stressors that these civilizations collectively could not address within the time frame. And so if we look at our society today, one might argue that it's similarly fractured, similarly under economic stress, similarly under cultural stress as well, fractured and fragile diplomatic situation. It mirrors very much this scenario.
Yeah.
And so for a responsible decision maker, that is certainly a factor.
And
so that's amazing discussion right there. It seems like if the president came out and said that this is true, NHI is real, it seems like that would precipitate, like you said, a crescendo of catastrophic disclosure. So again, what is the advantage to the nation to come out and say that? If you look back in history, these amazing changes on the planet resulted in the total collapse of the actual governments, those civilizations that were doing so well, advanced civilizations. And now you are the lead country, the lead nation and your allies effectively running the world. You have all the information. Why, oh why, would you ever release that information? I think that's the problem. So they're not going to do it on their own. It basically has to be forced or come from catastrophic disclosure, some sort of event, or public hearings, right? If the government is actually transparent enough, could enough people inside the government really take these moral issues to heart and share this information? I think that's why we have all these whistleblowers. And I think that's why you have such a cadre of people inside the government that aren't going to let it happen, not on their watch.
And so I guess when you say that, are you implying that perhaps we as a society may not be ready for disclosure? Or are you saying that we may not be able to defend ourselves against this other force?
So there's sort of different viewpoints on, whether people are ready to, deal with this phenomenon. And, popular culture is kind of infused with this stuff. Roswell became a meme a long time ago. We got programs on ancient aliens, Skinwalker Ranch, all this stuff. I guess I would draw an analogy, though, for people that believe in a certain faith tradition, whatever that faith tradition is, and hold to that and subscribe to that in a very serious and devout way, and sort of pose the question, even for folks of that ilk, and I would count myself as one, if you're confronted with the reality of your religious belief system, like the reality of the metaphysical, an angel, a messenger from God, what have you, that's going to be a sea state change in your way of dealing with reality, right? Even though you already believe it, right? So it's one thing to believe and it's another to know. And I think in this context, this phenomena has the potential for an analogous effect both on the individual and on society.
Yeah, but do you think that the phenomena, this non-human form of intelligence, represents a threat to humanity?
So this is a good question too, and some of the other folks have sort of framed things in that light. And I guess I would suggest that if the universe is governed by conservation laws, and it's probably reasonable to assume the laws of nature that we understand apply everywhere. We may have incomplete understanding, undoubtedly we do, of these laws, but they're sort of homogeneous and they apply throughout the universe. And so those laws are governed by conservation rules. There's conserved quantities. And so this reality really forces a Darwinian type competition in order to survive. And so it's reasonable to assume any other civilization that's evolved has come up through the same Darwinian evolutionary process. So I think it's naive to expect complete altruism until and unless you get to a state of post-scarcity, where you essentially have no physical needs that we're kind of encumbered with in this universe. And so in some sense, it's the economics of the future that are going to determine whether there's cooperation, competition, or some kind of symbiosis, and inform the intention. But to assume either malintent or complete altruism, I think, is somewhat naive.
Yeah.
So he mentions Darwinian evolution there. What's interesting is if the population of the Earth knows this is a reality, right? Instead of believing, if everyone actually knows, will that change the behavior of the NHI? And that goes back, he already mentioned, if there's agreements in place. So again, the NHI hasn't come out and just publicized their existence to the rest of humanity. Do they have an active, actual interest in keeping this secret? So would it change their behavior? And that could be another reason that they don't disclose, is they're not allowed to. Maybe it's part of the agreement that they can't disclose for some reason. And then this points to Darwinian evolution is, do we have some sort of virus NHI, or are we being taken advantage of by this non-human intelligence in some sort of Darwinian manner? Is there a symbiotic relationship here, but it's definitely negative on our side, as in we are the victims of some sort of NHI, or it's farming us, as people have argued in the past. This would go back to the agreements. But interesting, we should, I guess, assume that Darwinian evolution on this planet could be mirrored by Darwinian evolution in the rest of the cosmos? And then what is the actual nature of the NHI? And would knowing really affect? Would it cause huge negative effects that we can't foresee because the NHI doesn't want that information to be known? Kind of scary to think about.
So it sounds like what you're saying is it's impossible to know the true intentions of a higher intelligence. We may be competing for the same scarce resources. We may not be, right? We may be almost irrelevant to them, and they may be acting altruistically, although we cannot safely assume that. And so I guess I'm curious, if we continue down this disclosure path, do you believe that disclosure is inevitable?
So, again, people that sort of look at this topic and study it, and there have been some good examinations on this from a historical standpoint, have realized that, like, we're not in really a new state. Like, this sort of disclosure emphasis has come and gone over time. And so this is not the first time we've arrived at this stage. I would suggest that maybe the peak of this current cycle happened last December with the Schumer amendment, and then it got rolled back, it was defeated in the House. And so it remains to be seen, if the process is going to continue. One hopes and can maybe draw a little bit of confidence that maybe this will come around is the colloquy that Senator Schumer and Senator Rounds had back in December. After their amendment got killed, they basically went on the Senate floor and articulated their rationale for the legislation. And I think Senator Schumer, to quote him, almost said it was a travesty that this did not pass. So this is, a bipartisan colloquy on a topic that I guess most people would probably consider fringe, and yet these two senators felt the need to do that and to double down on their desire to see this through.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll see maybe a reintroduction of some version of that this summer with the goal of maybe putting it into the NDAA by the end of the year.
Do you think that it's imperative that the United States leads on the disclosure efforts?
So this is an interesting question too, because this is a global phenomenon and it's affecting other countries just like the United States. The reporting on this is clear over decades. Other countries have reported this stuff. And not only that, the Vatican has come out and made statements that reference or tangentially reference this topic. So organized religion has a say in this topic as well. So it's really a whole of planet, whole of humanity problem. And so the U.S. has got its role to play, but these other countries have their role to play, and it would behoove us to recognize that U.S. action can be preempted by another party, and it would be probably more conducive to work collectively.
Yeah, I think disclosure, assuming the reality that we're surrounded by life and we have non-human intelligence interacting us with the entire planet, it has to be an assured thing at some point in the future. I did an interview with Klaus Svahn, and he said the stigma in Sweden has almost completely gone away. It's basically disappeared in the last 6 months. So the U.S., I mentioned, has so much to lose, but our technology is improving at such a rate, and around the entire world, we're so globally connected now. Unless the NHI has a huge, huge interest in keeping this secret and is able to completely dampen down our knowledge of this, unless they have amazing technology, which I'm sure they do, to keep this completely out of our minds, then I think it's just inevitable that we will find out. We will understand what's going on in the universe around us as information is free flowing. When we fully reach the information age here and our global world at the speed of light is able to transfer any sort of information from all the technology we have, I think it's just a matter of time. Based on what I've seen looking back over the past 3 years, is the NHI doesn't seem to be just from one NHI. It seems to be that there are many different types of extraterrestrials visiting the planet or different types of life. And sooner or later, there's going to be a large enough event like Phoenix Lights. There's going to be enough people there with enough technology, enough cell phones. It's going to be real time that it just can't be shut down. Unless the NHI just has a total lockdown on this planet. And then that's just an insane thought to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I don't fully understand that I'd love to get your thoughts on, Karl, I mean, if we assume that a higher form of non-human intelligence has been visiting this planet, if we assume that some of the statements made by folks like Dave Grush are true, that we have crash materials, and if we assume that those craft that we may have exhibit characteristics that defy our current understanding of physics, it would seem that that technology would provide an incredible strategic advantage to whatever nation ends up reverse engineering it first. And so, to me, that would imply that there is a race happening to reverse engineer this, and that this topic would be a top priority.
Exactly. I mean, he just nailed it right on the head there. And as soon as you say, yeah, this is real, as soon as you say that, you have suddenly given everyone else in the world a ticket, right? They're now in the race. They're suddenly in the race, whereas before they weren't in the race. You could just go wherever you wanted and take whatever you wanted because no one really knew what was going on. And now all of a sudden, everyone knows. It just seems that that's a huge, amazingly huge disadvantage. And by the way, it could totally disrupt the entire world. And if you're the top nation, right, you have huge incentive to not disrupt the whole system. So yeah, it sounds like the US will not be able to lead unless completely forced by the public.
Do you agree with that?
So I think some of what you say is a reasonable conclusion to be drawn. And I've suggested something similar in past statements. The point here, though, is to go from a pre-disclosure to a post-disclosure world, maybe two stable states that are separated by an unstable middle ground. And so how you make that transition, again, bespeaks to the concern about this catastrophic disclosure. And this has come up in sort of arms regulation too. Mutually assured destruction, however much we don't like it, is sort of a stable kind of geostrategic regime. The Reagan era defense shield idea is also a very stable scenario, but to go from one to the other is very unstable.
Yeah.
And so this topic sort of mirrors that.
Yeah, and I know you and I were talking earlier about this idea that in order to really understand the phenomena, it's likely that we have to further our understanding of reality itself. And I guess I'm wondering, I can imagine a future where we acknowledge and we know that there is a higher form of non-human intelligence, yet we still don't truly understand the phenomena. We still don't truly understand reality. And so I guess I'm wondering, do you think that we'll ever truly understand what's going on? Or if part of the game, part of the journey, part of life itself is operating in an environment where at least part of it is fundamentally unknowable to us?
So it's a totally philosophical, epistemological question, right? Really about the nature of knowledge itself, right? Like, how can we know what we know and how can we be sure about what we know? I guess personally, I subscribe to the idea that there is an ultimate truth and that humanity being created in the image of a higher power is endowed with the quality to pursue an understanding of that. And so our part of our objective in this existence is to seek that out and try to understand that ultimate truth to a greater and greater degree. And this would be a component of that, obviously.
Yeah, I think kind of disagree there. I think the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Donald Hoffman's argued that maybe we'll just be on a continuous journey to try and find out more and more information, because there'll always be a next level. There'll always be something further, one more dimension or something else to learn. So the more we know, the more we realize we don't know.
Well, Karl, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today.
Okay, so that was just an amazing interview, just with the conviction, man. He has all of the background. He had all of the clearances. He was on the UAP Task Force. He fully supports David Grush. He was involved in satellites. He was involved in corporations. He knows the process. He knows intelligence. I mean, he seems extremely credible. And he says just point blank right there that, yes, there is NHI. It definitely is interacting with us. And we have crash recovery programs. He's obviously thought about the advantages and disadvantages, and he proposes those 6 reasons that we haven't disclosed, and the 3 that he argues why we should. Yeah, they're great talking points, but man, they don't stack up. I don't think any of them even stack up to 1. So How can we better argue that disclosure is in the benefit of nations like the United States, right? Who seem like they have so much to lose, especially if they've been keeping the secret for 80 years. Why? Are they under some sort of agreements that he mentions there? Is the NHI extremely interested in keeping this knowledge secret, the knowledge of their existence, to the rest of the populace? And if so, why? That would imply that we're at some sort of negative relationship, right? Or they just happen to be altruistic. Could they be completely altruistic and just don't want to interfere with the planet? Please hit the like button. It really helps the channel. This amazing interview, amazing insights from Colonel Nell. Subscribe to get future videos, notifications. And if you want to support the channel, go to patreon.com/Chris Slato. You get exclusive videos, background content, and merchandise. You can also become a YouTube member. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.